Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Welcome to the history class. Students, it's lesson number 2 and the chapter is What were the causes and consequences of the War of Independence 1857 till 58. Today's lesson aim will be to acquire and demonstrate skills in critical analysis of primary and secondary historical sources, and the objectives will be students will be able to know the Queen's Proclamation, British rule, how the Muslims suffered, and the birth of nationalist ideas. It's chapter number 3. What were the causes and consequences of the War of Independence 1857 till 58? The subtopics will be the Proclamation of 1858, British rule, the Muslims, the birth of nationalist ideas. The Proclamation of 1858. The British said they would not interfere in the religious beliefs of the people, pay due regard to ancient property, rights, and customs, abide by all treaty obligations, agree to no further territorial acquisition, guarantee the rights to appointments in public service. With the Queen's Proclamation Act of 1858, it brought India under the direct rule of the British Crown. The rights of the East India Company were taken over by the government in Britain. Queen proclaimed that no one will be in any ways favored or disqualified by reason of their religious faith and observances. Everyone will enjoy the equal and impartial protection of the law. Doctrine of lapse was abolished. They decided that there will be no further territorial acquisition. Missionaries were instructed not to force conversions, and Queen also announced that we shall respect the rights, dignity, and honor of our native princes as our own. British rule. After the war, EIC was abolished. Direct responsibility of ruling was in the hands of the Governor-Generals, now called Viceroys. Despite the proclamation of 1858, by 1878 only one Indian became officer in ICS. Native princes who were loyal with British were allowed to remain on their thrones. In 1877, the British Queen Victoria was appointed as Empress of India. The Indian royal family had formally been replaced. Students, as after the War of Independence, the EIC was abolished. Viceroys, they were responsible to handle the affairs of India. After 20 years of the proclamation, there was only one Indian who came to the officer level. Otherwise, Indians were not more than on the position of an inkpot filler or the person who carried message from one person to another. But the native prince who showed themselves to be loyal to the British, they were allowed to remain on the thrones, but they were not more than the puppets in the hands of British. The last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah, was exiled by British to Burma because of the involvement in the Indian revolt. He was sent to live in Burma for the rest of his life. So in 1877, British Queen Victoria was appointed as Empress of India. The Indian royal family had formally been replaced by the British. The Muslims. British considered that the Muslim community was behind the War of Independence. British began to recruit men mostly from Pathans, Sikhs, and Gurkhas. Muslim objective British education, and British withdrew funding from Muslim school. In contrast, Hindus soon found favor of British by applying themselves to the new rule. Students, British blame Muslims for the revolt and war as they thought that they have taken power from Muslims, so it is possible that the Muslims wanted to take revenge or they wanted to take their power back. They started to distrust Muslims. Even British began to recruit men from the families who were considered trustworthy, like Sikhs, Pathans, Gurkhas. Gurkhas were the people of Nepal who were known for their military skills. Muslims objected the British education and stopped sending their kids to British schools as they thought that might be they will convert to Christianity or they called it un-Islamic. British also withdrew funding from Muslim schools and Muslim education fell into decline. as Muslims were economically backward. In contrast, Hindus gained the favor of the British as they adopted British culture and they started to gain English education. So, this is the reason why Muslim communities suffered after the War of Independence.
The nationalist movement. Nationalism is a sense of oneness born out of sharing the same geographical territory, the same history and culture, and same aspiration to be independent of foreign domination. In India, this feeling arose among the people after the revolt of 1857, when people from different walks of life belonging to different regions rose against one common enemy. The second half of 19th century saw the growth of national political conscience in India. There were many factors that united Indians against foreign rule. The British ruled India administratively and politically by getting the country under their centralized control. Uniform laws were applied to everyone without any discrimination. Apart from uniform legal system, the postal system, common currency, railway and telegraph systems helped people to link with different parts of the country, thus bringing people closer to each other. Scholars and writers, through their writings and discoveries, made Indians proud of their glorious past. Some of the reformers inspired the Indians not only to discard outmoded customs and practices, but also to question the British authority. They also roused patriotic sentiments among the people. The press and the growth of nationalist literature spread modern ideas of nationalism, democracy, socialism, and internationalism. Besides this, the introduction of English language acted as a link between Indians from different regions of the country. Knowing this language helped Indians to communicate with each other. Britain was the emerging industrial giant in the 19th century, and the educated Indians thought that this progress would be reflected in India as well. The process of disillusionment started when the Indian intellectuals noticed that in all spheres the country was regressing. The start of deindustrialization, a gradual decline of Indian handicrafts, and interest of British in opening new industries was significant enough to anger and frustrate Indian expectations. India was turned into a mere supplier of raw materials and a market for British manufactured goods. Thus, India was becoming poorer day by day. During the British rule, Indians were often ill-treated. They could not aspire to higher posts in administration. They were not allowed to travel in the same compartments of train with the British. Lord Lytton passed the Arms Act, which prohibited Indians from possessing arms without licenses. No such restriction was imposed on Europeans living in India. Moreover, Vernacular Press Act was passed, which restricted the newspaper published in vernacular languages in India. The recruitment age of Indians was reduced in Indian civil services. The introduction of Ilbert Bill meant that Indian judges could try people of the British nationality, unlike the earlier times when Indian magistrates could not judge cases involving British. Lord Ripon wanted to end unjust practices, but the British living in India protested against this bill. Ultimately, Ripon was forced to partially yield to their demands. According to a new rule, Europeans tried in a district magistrates' court could ask for a jury at least half of which could consist of Europeans. Lord Ripon was called back to England. The reaction of the British showed their attitude as one of racial superiority.
The birth of nationalist ideas. British rule proved unpopular with many Indians. Viceroy Lord Lytton ended import duties on British cotton goods entering India. The lack of opportunities for Indians led to widespread criticism on British in newspaper articles. British passed the Vernacular Act and Arms Act in 1878. In this environment, it was not surprising that nationalist ideas began to grow. Students, after the War of Independence, British took strong measures to ensure their control. Despite the proclamation, Indians were not getting proper opportunities. Even you can say that British were not ready to give them any real power. So British rule proved unpopular as Indian people in the legislative councils they can give only their opinion, but the final decision was taken by the British. So again, I'll say it that British made the local Indians puppets in their hands because they were not having any role. British just hired them to take the public opinion, and the final decision is taken by the British themselves. So the British did not take care of the interest of the local Indians, and they made such policies which were giving benefits only to the British because, for example, British ended the taxes on the British goods entering into India because the prices of the British goods were higher comparatively with the local Indian cotton. So British found it harder to sell their products, so they decided to ended up all the taxes on the British goods. And after this all, the when the taxes were removed from the British goods, so the British products were selling on a cheaper prices, and the local traders found it harder to sell their goods. And the other thing is that due to the lack of opportunities, there was a widespread criticism on British in newspaper articles in the local languages, and the British passed a Vernacular Act in which they placed some strict control on these newspapers, not to publish anything against the British community. And British passed Arms Act 2 in the same year, and according to that act, it was impossible for the most of the Indians that they can't purchase any weapon. Basically, British wanted to ensure that there will be no more uprising. So, in these circumstances, yeah, in this environment, we can say that the nationalist feeling grew. Students, here I am assigning you a classwork. It's a source question, and in this question, I want to test your understanding of what a source tells you. You can set a comprehension question too, so you have to read it, comprehend it, and quote information from it. And this question contains 3 marks. Students, here I'm adding one more question for your classwork, and it's a source question, a picture source. This question is a little more demanding, and this time you would have to look at the picture and work something out from it. And basically, what you have to do, you have to look into the picture, and you will take out the answer by like what the picture is showing to you. Just a little bit hint which I want to give you is that if someone is giving me the answer like it tells us that they thought they should hang the Indians who fought against them, then students, it's a low mark answer. Try to give me the most possible answer what you are observing, that they have no sympathy, and what more you are observing here. And this question contains 5 marks. I want 5 main points, 6 main points at least from you guys. And I'll upload the key soon so you can have a self-checking of what you are writing. Moreover, here I am adding a homework for you as well, and the question is, what was the effect of the on the Muslim community in India? This contained 4 marks, and basically this question demands facts. You have to give the facts that what were the effects on the Muslim community after the War of Independence. So do your work, complete your assignments on the regular basis, and keep it safe with you. Thank you. Hope you understand the question. If you are not getting any point, so you can discuss and you can ask the question freely.